The courier's knock was a sharp, impatient sound that cut through the sterile quiet of the apartment. Liam signed for the large manila envelope, his hands steady, his expression unreadable. He closed the door, the lock clicking into place with a sound of finality. He knew, even before he saw the letterhead of the city's most expensive law firm, what it was. He ran his thumb over the embossed logo, a stylized lion that seemed to sneer with inherited arrogance. The paper was thick, creamy, and cold to the touch. Inside, the language was just as cold, a series of clauses and demands that sought to excise him from Chloe's life as neatly and efficiently as a surgeon removing a benign tumor. He was a line item to be settled, a temporary inconvenience on the path back to her pristine, preordained future. He read the words, irreconcilable differences, equitable distribution of assets, petition for dissolution, and felt not a storm of grief, but a profound and unsettling calm. The storm had passed long ago, leaving this quiet devastation in its wake. He had been weathering a hurricane for 5 years. This was merely the official damage report. He set the papers down on the small, unassuming dining table, the only piece of furniture in the room that was truly his. His gaze drifted to the heavy wooden box on his bookshelf. It was old, made of dark, polished oak, with a simple brass latch. It had been his father's. Inside was a single, sealed envelope, identical in size and weight to the one he had just received. His father had given it to him the week before his wedding, his hand, already frail with the illness that would soon take him, resting on Liam's. His voice had been a low, serious rumble. "You love this girl," he'd said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "I hope she and her family are worthy of it. But their world, it's different from ours, Liam. It has sharp edges. I want you to have this. Keep it safe. Don't open it, not unless you have to. Don't open this until she files." Last Friday she had filed. The words echoed in the silent apartment, a promise fulfilled, a seal broken. He had thought his father was being cynical, a man soured by his own losses, unable to see the bright, shining love Liam saw in Chloe. For 5 years that box had been a monument to his father's mistaken judgment. Now he understood it for what it was, a life raft, patiently waiting for the shipwreck he had refused to see coming. He walked over to the bookshelf, his movements deliberate. The box was heavy in his hands, weighted with the past and the future. He looked from the divorce papers on the table to the box in his hands. One represented the end of a life he had tried to build. The other held the beginning of one he had never known he had. The arrogant lion on the lawyer's letterhead was confident. What it didn't know was that a far more patient, more powerful animal was about to be awakened. We hope you're enjoying this story so far. It's a tale about hidden strengths and the quiet dignity of those who are underestimated. If you find yourself rooting for the underdog, go ahead and give this video a like. It really helps us know what kind of stories you connect with. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing so you don't miss how this all unfolds. We're curious, where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments below. Now let's get back to the moment everything began to change. To understand the chill that settled in Liam's heart, you had to understand the warmth he had once felt. His first meeting with Chloe's parents, Robert and Eleanor Vance, had been at their palatial home in the city's most exclusive enclave. The house wasn't just a home, it was a declaration. Marble floors gleamed under recessed lighting that highlighted a collection of abstract art chosen for its investment potential rather than its beauty. The air itself seemed filtered, scrubbed clean of any unpleasant realities. Liam, in his best and only charcoal suit, felt like a crow that had accidentally wandered into an aviary of exotic birds. Robert Vance was a man forged in the crucible of generational wealth. He was tall and silver-haired, with a handshake that was less a greeting and more a subtle assessment of another man's worth. He sized Liam up with a gaze that was coolly dismissive. his eyes flicking from Liam's sensible shoes to his moderately priced watch. "Liam," he had boomed, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous foyer, "Chloe has told us so much about you." The pause was infinitesimal, but it was there. The unspoken addendum hung in the air, and none of it was impressive. Dinner was an exercise in sustained humiliation, a masterclass in condescension delivered with flawless etiquette. Eleanor, a woman who seemed to be sculpted from porcelain and disapproval, led the subtle assault. "Liam, is it? Such a solid name," she'd murmured, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "And you're a financial consultant? That must be very stable." Every compliment was a veiled insult, every question a carefully laid trap. The word stable was used as if it were a synonym for unambitious. Solid was code for common. Marcus, Chloe's brother, was a cruder, younger version of his father. He was all sharp angles and restless energy, a man who mistook arrogance for confidence. He leaned forward, a smirk playing on his lips. "Consultant, huh? Safe bet. 9 to 5, steady paycheck. Me? I can't do that. I'm in venture capital. High risk, high reward. You gotta have the stomach for it." He clapped Liam on the shoulder, a gesture of feigned camaraderie that was really a display of dominance. "You gotta be willing to lose it all to win it all, you know?" Through it all, Chloe was silent. She was the silent enabler. She sat beside Liam, her hand resting on his arm, a beautiful, tragic ornament. She would squeeze his hand under the table after a particularly sharp comment from her father, or offer him a small, apologetic smile when her mother inquired about his family's modest background. But she never spoke up. She never said, "Stop." She never said, "That's enough." She never defended him. Her silence was a betrayal far deeper than their words. It was a tacit agreement. She was one of them, and he was an outsider she had brought in, an interesting curiosity who was now failing to amuse her powerful family. Liam, ever patient, ever dignified, simply smiled and answered their questions. He didn't rise to their bait. He didn't defend his profession or his background. He spoke of his work with a quiet passion, discussing market trends and economic forecasts with an articulate precision that seemed to bore them. They didn't want a conversation. They wanted a confirmation of their own superiority. His refusal to act cowed or impressed was, in itself, an act of defiance they couldn't quite comprehend. They saw a man in a simple suit speaking of a simple job, and they drew their simple conclusions. They mistook his quietness for weakness. They mistook his patience for a lack of ambition. He remembered one moment with piercing clarity. Robert had been holding forth about a recent acquisition, a complex deal involving shell corporations and offshore entities. "It was a masterpiece of financial engineering," Robert declared, swirling the deep red wine in his crystal glass. "Authored by a ghost, some anonymous savant they call Aurelius. Made a fortune for the early investors. I'd give my left arm to know who that man is." Liam felt a strange tremor go through him, a jolt of irony so profound it was almost painful. He simply nodded, taking a slow sip of water. "It sounds like a fascinating strategy," he said, his voice perfectly level. He didn't say that Aurelius's was the name his father used for the investment models he designed, models he had taught Liam since he was a teenager. He didn't say that the fascinating strategy Robert so admired was one Liam himself had refined and executed for a private, unlisted fund his father had established years ago. He just sat there, the architect of the very thing being used to measure his own inadequacy, and said nothing. He looked at Chloe, hoping to see a flicker of pride, of shared knowledge, because she was the only other person who knew. But she just looked away, her expression a careful, curated blank. In that moment, he knew his father had been right. The edges of their world were sharper than he could have ever imagined. The days and weeks that followed that first dinner set the pattern for their marriage. The Vances treated Liam not as a son-in-law, but as a project, a charity case. Their generosity was a weapon, each gift a reminder of his perceived inadequacy. For his birthday, they gave him a watch that cost more than his car, a heavy, ostentatious timepiece that felt like a manacle on his wrist. "Now you'll look the part, son," Robert had said, the word son dripping with condescension. The unspoken part was clear. "Because you certainly don't act it." They planned extravagant vacations to Monaco and Dubai, always making a great show of covering Liam's expenses. The transactions were never discreet. Eleanor would make a point of handing Chloe a thick envelope of cash in front of him. "Here, darling," she'd say, her voice bright and brittle. "For Liam's little incidentals, we wouldn't want him to feel stressed." Each gesture was designed to diminish him, to reinforce the narrative that he was a fortunate pauper who had married into a world he could never afford on his own. Liam suggested simpler trips, a cabin in the mountains, a quiet beach in a less fashionable country, places where they could be alone, away from the constant judgment of her family. Chloe would entertain the idea for a moment, her eyes lighting up with a spark of the woman he'd fallen in love with. But the spark would always die, extinguished by a phone call from her mother or brother. "But Mother has already booked a villa in Tuscany," she would say, her voice laced with a resignation that broke his heart. It would be rude to cancel now. Loyalty to her family always superseded loyalty to him. He was a secondary concern, an accessory to her life, not a partner in it. He tried to build a world for them, a world on his own terms. He was an exceptionally skilled financial consultant, sought after by those who valued substance over flash. His income was more than comfortable. It was substantial by any normal measure. They could have lived a beautiful life, a life of quiet luxury, free from the Vances' suffocating influence. He found a house for them, a lovely restored brownstone in a historic neighborhood, with a garden and a fireplace. It was a home, not a statement piece. He brought Chloe to see it, his heart full of hope. She walked through the rooms, her heels clicking on the original hardwood floors. "It's charming," she said, the word hanging in the air like a death sentence. "It's very you, Liam." He saw the house through her eyes then. The rooms seemed smaller, the ceilings lower, the charm faded into quaint inadequacy. That evening she came home with blueprints for a glass and steel monstrosity in the same gated community as her parents. The down payment, she announced without a trace of shame, was a welcome to the neighborhood gift from her father. Liam stood his ground. "No, Chloe," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "We need to build our own life, not a satellite office for your father." The argument that followed was the first of many. It was the moment the cracks in their foundation became undeniable fissures. "My family is just trying to help," she'd cried, her voice rising. "They want us to have the best. Why can't you accept that? Why do you have to be so proud?" "It's not about pride, Chloe," he tried to explain, his voice a low plea for understanding. "It's about partnership. It's about us. This," he gestured around their perfectly adequate, yet in her eyes, humble apartment, "is what we can afford. The life your father is offering isn't a gift, it's a leash." She didn't understand. Or perhaps she did, and she simply preferred the gilded cage. The brownstone was forgotten. They remained in the apartment, a physical manifestation of their impasse. It was too small for her ambitions, and too large for the love that was meant to fill it. It became a place of tense silences and unspoken resentments. He would come home from a day of managing millions for his discreet clients, his mind sharp and engaged, only to be met with Chloe's subtle sighs of disappointment. She'd scroll through photos of her friends' lavish parties and European holidays, the blue light of her phone illuminating a face etched with dissatisfaction. The final humiliation, the one that precipitated the lawyer's letter, came disguised as an act of paternal concern. Robert had summoned Liam to his office, a vast expanse of mahogany and leather on the top floor of the Vance Tower. The city sprawled out below them, a toy set for powerful men. Robert sat behind a desk the size of a small car, a benevolent king addressing a humble subject. "Liam," he began, steepling his fingers, "let's talk man to man. I'm worried about Chloe. I'm worried about you." He paused, letting the feigned gravity of the moment settle. "This consulting work of yours, it's fine, it's respectable, but it's not going to give my daughter the life she deserves, the life she is accustomed to." Liam remained silent, his posture relaxed, his hands resting in his lap. He let Robert speak, giving him all the rope he needed. "I've been thinking," Robert continued, leaning forward. "I have a position opening up in our acquisitions department, Vice President of Regional Analysis. It's a good spot for a guy like you, a chance to learn the business from the ground up. The salary is a significant step up from what you're making now. It would give you a real future, a real path." The offer was a masterpiece of insulting generosity, a vice president title that was, in reality, a glorified middle management role. A step up in salary that was, to Robert, pocket change, but framed as a life-altering sum for Liam. It was a way to finally bring Liam fully under his control, to make him an employee, another asset to be managed. He would be owned. Liam met his father-in-law's gaze, the quiet before the storm. He could have ended it right there. He could have opened his briefcase and produced a single bank statement that would have vaporized the smug, paternalistic expression on Robert's face. He could have mentioned the name Aurelius and watched the blood drain from the older man's cheeks. But it wasn't time. The calculus of his father's final lesson was precise. The response had to be proportional to the offense, and the final offense had not yet been committed. Instead, he gave a small, slow smile. "Robert," he said, his voice calm and even, "thank you for the offer. It's very generous, but I'm quite content where I am. I'll have to decline." Robert's face hardened. The mask of benevolence fell away, revealing the cold, hard arrogance beneath. He had expected gratitude, perhaps even a tearful acceptance. He had not expected refusal. It was incomprehensible to him that someone would turn down a seat, however small, at his table. "Content?" Robert scoffed, the word an epithet. "Contentment is for old men and fools, Liam. I thought you were a man, but perhaps I was mistaken." The insult, so direct and crude after years of veiled jabs, was the true declaration of war. Liam stood up, his movements fluid and unhurried. "Thank you for your time, Robert," he said, extending a hand that Robert pointedly ignored. Liam simply let his own hand drop to his side, his dignity intact. He walked out of the office, the thick carpet swallowing the sound of his footsteps. He didn't need to look back to know that Robert was staring after him, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. He knew, with absolute certainty, that the call to the lawyers would be made before he even reached the lobby. The final piece was in place. The conditions his father had set had been met. Back in his apartment, the divorce papers lay on the table like a formal invitation. An invitation to a reckoning. Liam picked up the heavy oak box. He ran his fingers over the smooth, aged wood, a tangible link to his father's foresight, his quiet, ferocious love. He carried it to the table and set it down next to the legal documents. The Vance family's declaration of war on one side, his father's armory on the other. He took a deep breath, the air tasting of dust and liberation. With a steady hand, he unfastened the brass latch. The lid opened with a soft, woody sigh, releasing the faint scent of old paper and cedar. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was the envelope. It was thick, heavy, its edges sealed with a wax stamp bearing his father's personal sigil, a stylized A for Aurelius. The ink on the front, in his father's familiar, elegant script was stark and clear. For Liam, he lifted it out. It felt less like paper and more like a stone tablet, dense with unspoken history. For 5 years he had honored his promise. He had endured the slights, the condescension, the slow, grinding erosion of his spirit, all while this power lay dormant. He had given Chloe every chance to choose him, to build a life with him. He had given her family every chance to see him as a man, not a balance sheet. They had failed every test. He carefully broke the wax seal. The sound was a tiny crack in the silence of the room, a sound of release. He unfolded the first document. It wasn't a letter full of fatherly advice. It was a deed. The deed to the holding company, Aurelius Capital Partners, LLC, a company he thought had been dissolved upon his father's death. A company he now saw was not dissolved, but transferred into a blind trust, with Liam as the sole beneficiary, the trust to be activated upon one of two conditions: his 30th birthday or the legal dissolution of his marriage to Chloe Vance. He had turned 30 6 months ago. The condition had been met twice over. He kept reading, his heart beating a slow, heavy rhythm. The portfolio was staggering. It wasn't just the seed money from his father. It was the result of 2 decades of brilliant, silent growth, guided first by his father and then, for the last 7 years, by him. He had been managing his own vast, hidden fortune without even knowing its true scale. He had been the ghost, Aurelius, all along, thinking he was merely a steward for a private fund, when in fact he was the king of a silent empire. His father had shielded him from the knowledge, letting him build his own skills, his own character, his own sense of worth, untainted by the corrosive influence of immense wealth. It was the greatest gift his father had ever given him, the chance to become a man of value before he knew he was a man of wealth. There was more. Tucked behind the deed was a second, slimmer folder. This one was labeled simply VCI, Vance Consolidated Industries, Robert's company. Liam's hands trembled slightly as he opened it. It was a complete, devastatingly thorough analysis of Robert's empire. His father, the meticulous financial strategist, had done his homework on his daughter-in-law's family. It detailed a pattern of leverage buyouts, inflated asset valuations, and a dangerously overextended credit line with a single banking institution. The entire Vance empire, the source of all their pride and arrogance, was a house of cards. A magnificent, glittering house of cards, but a house of cards nonetheless. And at the very bottom of the folder was the kill switch, a series of bond certificates. Obscure, low-yield corporate bonds issued by one of VCI's subsidiary companies years ago, bonds that Robert had likely forgotten ever existed. His father had quietly bought them up on the secondary market for pennies on the dollar. Alone, they were worthless, but together they represented a controlling stake in the debt of the subsidiary that held the deed to Vance Tower itself. The very building where Robert had tried to humiliate him. A covenant in the bond agreement, highlighted in his father's neat yellow marker, stated that if VCI's debt-to-equity ratio exceeded a certain threshold, a threshold the company had secretly crossed 6 months ago, according to his father's projections, the bondholders could call for immediate repayment. An impossible sum. Failure to pay would trigger a default, allowing the bondholders to seize the subsidiary's primary asset, the tower. Liam leaned back in his chair, the papers spread before him. The scale of his father's strategic genius was breathtaking. He had not just provided Liam with a shield, he had handed him a sword, a cannon, an entire arsenal. He could, with a single phone call, become Robert Vance's landlord. He could trigger a cascade of defaults that would unravel the entire Vance empire. The power was absolute, it was terrifying, and it was his. He thought of the years of quiet humiliation, the dismissive glances, the condescending gifts. Eleanor's brittle smiles, Marcus's smug provocations, Chloe's devastating silence. He thought of Robert sitting in his throne room in the sky, declaring him not a man. The anger he had suppressed for so long was a cold, hard knot in his stomach. But it was not a hot, reckless fury. It was a focused, clarifying rage. The rage of a good man pushed too far. His father's note, the only personal item in the box, was tucked into the very back. It was short and to the point. Liam, if you are reading this, then I am sorry. I had hoped it would never come to this. This power is not for revenge. Revenge is a fool's game. It is for justice. It is for balance. Remember who you are. Remember what we value. Integrity, honor, strength held in reserve. They will not understand these things, so you will have to teach them. Be the architect, my son, not the wrecking ball. Your loving father. Be the architect, not the wrecking ball. The words settled over him, calming the cold rage. Justice, not revenge. Balance. His father had given him the power to destroy the Vances, but he had also given him the wisdom not to. The goal was not to ruin them, but to right the scales, to force them to confront the truth of their own emptiness, to strip away the arrogance and see what, if anything, was left underneath. He spent the next 2 days in a state of focused calm. He contacted the law firm that managed his father's trust, a quiet, powerful firm whose name was whispered with reverence in the highest financial circles. The lead partner, a man named Alistair Finch, had known his father for 40 years. When Liam introduced himself and mentioned the Aurelius Trust, the deference in Finch's voice was immediate. "Mr. Aurelius," Finch had said, the name a title of ultimate respect. "We have been waiting for your call. Your father's instructions are quite clear. How can we be of service?" The meeting was set, not in a drab conference room, but in the main boardroom of Alistair Finch's firm. It was a room that exuded a power far older and more profound than Robert Vance's new money glitz. The walls were paneled in dark, century-old oak. A single, massive mahogany table dominated the space. The chairs were heavy leather, worn smooth by generations of silent, powerful men. From the windows, you could see Vance Tower, but from a superior angle, looking down slightly upon its gaudy, reflective roof. Liam requested the presence of Chloe, Robert, and their legal counsel. He also requested that Marcus and Eleanor attend. He wanted the entire family to be present for the lesson. Their lawyer, a bulldog of a man named Henderson, had initially scoffed at the request. "My clients are very busy people, Mr. Harrison. We will handle this through the usual channels. A simple settlement negotiation is all that's required." Liam let the silence stretch for a moment before replying, his voice soft but edged with steel. "Please inform your clients that this is not a negotiation. It is a mandatory meeting regarding the financial solvency of Vance Consolidated Industries. If they are not here at 10 a.m. on Thursday, the meeting will proceed without them. The consequences of their absence will be significant." He then had Alistair Finch's office send a second official summons, a letter that made Henderson's blood run cold. Suddenly, the Vances were no longer busy. The morning of the meeting, Liam dressed with deliberate care. He did not wear the ostentatious watch Robert had given him. He wore his father's watch, a simple, elegant piece with a worn leather strap. It was a timepiece of understated quality, a quiet statement of true worth. He chose his charcoal suit, the same one he had worn to that first dinner. It was a symbolic gesture, a closing of the circle. He was the same man on the outside, but on the inside, everything had changed. He placed the slim VCI folder into his leather briefcase, the symbolic object that had been hidden, now ready to be revealed. He felt no nervousness, only a profound sense of clarity. He was his father's son. He was the architect. And today, he was going to redesign the world. The Vances arrived exactly at 10 a.m., a flurry of anxiety masked by their usual arrogance. Robert strode in first, his face a thundercloud. Marcus followed, attempting a swagger that didn't quite work in the intimidatingly quiet room. Eleanor and Chloe trailed behind, their expressions a mixture of confusion and indignation. They saw Liam sitting alone at the far end of the massive table, a single briefcase beside him. He looked small and insignificant in the grand space. Robert's lawyer Henderson bustled in, his face red, whispering urgently to his client. "What is the meaning of this, Liam?" Robert demanded, his voice booming in the silent room. He remained standing, a power play that fell completely flat. "Some kind of pathetic stunt to try and get a better settlement? You're wasting our time." Liam didn't rise. He simply gestured to the chairs opposite him. "Please, have a seat," he said, his voice calm and resonant. "We have a great deal to discuss." Alistair Finch entered the room then, followed by two junior partners. Finch was a man who radiated an aura of immense, unshakable authority. He was older than Robert, with piercing blue eyes and a face that looked as if it were carved from granite. He nodded once to Liam, a gesture of profound respect. "Mr. Aurelius," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the weight of empires. He then turned his cool gaze upon the Vances. "Mr. Vance, thank you for coming." Robert's jaw tightened at the name. Aurelius. He shot a confused, angry look at Liam. "What is this? What is he talking about?" "Please," Liam said again, his voice patient. "Sit down." Reluctantly, they sat. The heavy leather chairs sighed under their weight. The air was thick with tension. Henderson began to speak, blustering about legal protocols and procedural fairness, but Alistair Finch cut him off with a single raised hand. The bulldog lawyer fell silent immediately, shocked into submission. "My client," Finch said, nodding toward Liam, "has called this meeting to discuss a matter of mutual interest, specifically the long-term viability of Vance Consolidated Industries." Marcus snorted, a harsh, ugly sound. "What would he know about VCI? He's a glorified accountant. This is a joke." Liam finally met Marcus's gaze. There was no anger in his eyes, only a sort of detached pity. He opened his briefcase and removed the slim folder labeled VCI. He slid it across the polished surface of the table. It stopped directly in front of Robert. "I believe you'll find I know a great deal," Liam said softly. "Open it." Robert stared at the folder as if it were a snake. He looked at Liam, then at his lawyer, then back at the folder. A seed of genuine fear was beginning to sprout beneath his bluster. With a hand that trembled almost imperceptibly, he reached out and opened the cover. He saw the analysis first. Pages and pages of data, charts, and projections. A perfect, damning portrait of his company's structural weaknesses. He saw his inflated assets, his precarious credit lines, all laid bare with a clinical, irrefutable precision. His face, already ruddy, began to pale. "Where did you get this?" he whispered, his voice hoarse. "My father was a very thorough man," Liam replied. "He believed in due diligence, especially where his family was concerned." Then Robert saw the second section of the folder, the bond certificates. His eyes widened. He recognized them, vaguely, as a minor debt instrument from a long-forgotten subsidiary. He looked at the accumulated value, and a strangled sound escaped his lips. He looked at the highlighted covenant, the clause about the debt-to-equity ratio, the trigger for immediate repayment. He understood, instantly, completely. This is impossible," he stammered, looking at Alistair Finch. Finch gave a slight, cold smile. "The Aurelius Trust has been the majority holder of these bonds for the last 18 months, Mr. Vance. Our data indicates your company has been in breach of this covenant for the last 2 quarters. We are, at Mr. Aurelius's discretion, fully within our rights to call for immediate and full repayment of the principal. The sum, I believe, is approximately $150 million, payable within 30 days. The room fell into a silence so profound it felt like a physical pressure. $150 million. It might as well have been $1 billion. Robert didn't have it. The company didn't have it. Paying it would require liquidating assets at a fire sale price, a move that would signal fatal weakness to the market and his primary lenders. It would trigger a death spiral. Eleanor was looking from her husband's ashen face to Liam, her mouth slightly agape. She didn't understand the numbers, but she understood the terror in her husband's eyes. Marcus was staring at Liam, his smug smirk gone, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. "You?" he breathed. "You're Aurelius?" Liam's gaze finally settled on Chloe. Her face was a canvas of shock. The man she had dismissed as stable and simple, the man she had allowed her family to humiliate for 5 years, the man she was in the process of discarding like a worn-out accessory, was the ghost, the savant, the financial genius her father had openly idolized. The dramatic irony was a chasm that had suddenly opened at her feet. "For 5 years," Liam began, his voice still quiet but now filling the entire room, "I have been a guest in your house. I have sat at your table, and I have listened." This was it, the list of grievances, not shouted in anger, but stated as fact. "I listened, Robert, when you called my work a safe bet and implied I lacked the courage for real success, all while you were unknowingly praising my strategies and wishing you could meet the man behind them. Well, you've met him." He turned his gaze to Eleanor. "I listened, Eleanor, when you commented on my solid name and my modest background and offered your daughter cash to cover my expenses so I wouldn't feel stressed. My modest background taught me that a person's worth isn't measured by the price of their watch, but by the strength of their character. A lesson, I fear, your family has yet to learn." He looked at Marcus. "And I listened, Marcus, when you lectured me on risk and reward. You took risks with your father's money. I built a global portfolio from the ground up, based on discipline, analysis, and foresight. You see, true risk isn't gambling. It's understanding the fundamentals so thoroughly that you can make the bold move with confidence. You were playing checkers. I was playing chess. The parallel structures were like hammer blows, each one echoing an old insult, now inverted and returned with devastating force." Finally, he looked at Chloe. His voice softened, but the pain was evident. "And you, Chloe, I listened to your silence. Your silence was the loudest sound in every room. It told me I was alone. It told me you had made your choice. And now you have made it legally binding." He stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the city. He stood there for a moment, his back to them, the symbolic architect surveying his creation. "My father taught me that power should be used to create balance, not to cause destruction," he said, turning back to face them. "So this is what is going to happen." The reversal of fortune was now absolute. They were no longer the powerful Vances, condescending to their daughter's inadequate husband. They were supplicants, prisoners in a boardroom, their entire world held hostage by the man they had so carelessly dismissed. "First," Liam stated, his voice now crisp and authoritative, "the divorce. It will be quiet, it will be swift, and it will be on my terms. There will be no equitable distribution of assets because my primary asset, the Aurelius Trust, was established long before our marriage and is legally firewalled. You will receive nothing from it. The petition you filed will be withdrawn, and we will file a joint petition for dissolution based on the terms I provide." He looked at Henderson, who was staring at him, utterly defeated. "Your lawyer will receive a copy of those terms this afternoon. They are not negotiable." He then turned back to Robert. "Second, VCI. I am not going to call the bonds. I am not going to destroy your company." A flicker of hope, of desperate relief crossed Robert's face. It was quickly extinguished. "I am going to save it," Liam continued. "The Aurelius Trust will acquire a 40% stake in Vance Consolidated Industries. We will purchase newly issued shares at their current, and I must say, significantly overvalued market price. The capital infusion will be sufficient to stabilize your debt-to-equity ratio and satisfy your lenders. In exchange, I will be appointed chairman of the board, effective immediately. Robert looked like he had been physically struck. You can't. I can, Liam said simply. It's either that or I call the bonds and we let the market do the rest. Your choice. He paused. As my first act as chairman, I will be commissioning a full, independent audit of all VCI holdings and practices. Any irregularities we discover will be corrected. VCI will become a model of corporate transparency and ethical governance. Its days as a private kingdom are over. It will be a real company. The moral mirror was now in place, forcing Robert to see the reflection of his own flawed creation. And Marcus, Liam said, his gaze shifting to the stunned younger man. Your position in venture capital is terminated. You will be reassigned. You're going to take that vice president of regional analysis job your father so generously offered me. The one where you can learn the business from the ground up. It's time you earned your keep. The poetic justice was exquisite. Marcus looked at his father, pleading, but Robert's face was a mask of gray defeat. And Eleanor, Liam said, his voice softening slightly once more, you will continue to host your charity balls and your society luncheons. But the Vance family will be making a series of significant, anonymous donations to charities that support education and opportunities for underprivileged youth. We will be giving others the chances you were so quick to judge me for not having. The room was silent again. The terms were devastating, but they were not destructive. He wasn't burning the house down. He was seizing it, renovating it, and forcing its residents to live by a new, more honorable set of rules. He was being the architect. He picked up his briefcase, its purpose served. Alistair will handle the details, he said, turning to leave. Liam, wait. It was Chloe. She had stood up, her face pale, her eyes filled with a storm of emotions he couldn't begin to decipher. Regret? Shock? A dawning, horrified respect? Why? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Why did you never say anything? Liam stopped at the door and looked back at her, the woman he had loved, the woman who had broken his heart with her silence. Because I wanted you to love me, Chloe, he said, and the simple truth of it was more devastating than any financial threat. Not my bank account. I wanted you to choose me, to defend me, to stand with me. I spent 5 years waiting for you to see the man, not the man's wallet. You saw neither. He opened the door and walked out into the hallway, leaving them in the wreckage of their own arrogance. The quiet before the storm was over. The storm had come and gone, and in its wake, the landscape was forever changed. He didn't feel triumph, not yet, only a deep, aching sense of release and the heavy weight of his father's final lesson, perfectly, painfully executed. The weeks that followed were a study in capitulation. The Vances, stripped of their primary weapon, financial dominance, had no choice but to comply. Henderson, the bulldog lawyer, became as meek as a lamb, processing the divorce paperwork with startling efficiency. The joint petition cited irreconcilable differences, and the settlement was precisely what Liam had dictated, a clean break, with Chloe retaining only her personal effects and a small portion of the joint savings account they had shared. The apartment, now feeling cavernous and empty, was legally his. The true drama, however, played out in the boardroom of Vance Tower. Liam's appointment as chairman was a quiet earthquake that sent shockwaves through the company. The first board meeting was a tense affair. The old guard, cronies of Robert's, eyed Liam with suspicion and resentment. Robert himself sat at the table, demoted to CEO in name only, his face a permanent mask of impotent fury. Liam did not rule with an iron fist. He ruled with a scalpel. He didn't make grand, sweeping changes. He asked quiet, pointed questions. He requested reports. He listened. The independent auditors he brought in, a team from Alistair Finch's network, moved through the company like ghosts, their findings landing on Liam's desk each morning. The irregularities were, as his father had suspected, numerous. Shady real estate deals, inflated invoices from companies owned by Robert's friends, golden parachutes for failed executives. Liam addressed each one methodically. He didn't fire people en masse. He called them into his office, one by one, laid out the irrefutable evidence of their malfeasance, and offered them a choice. Resign immediately with a modest severance in a non-disclosure agreement, or face a full investigation and legal prosecution. Most chose to resign. Marcus was the most visible casualty. True to his word, Liam installed him in the drab, windowless office of the Vice President of Regional Analysis. His expense account was slashed. His corporate card was canceled. He was tasked with analyzing sales data from the company's least profitable territories. It was tedious, unglamorous work. For the first time in his life, Marcus had to work for a living. His swagger vanished, replaced by a sullen, resentful compliance. He was a prince reduced to the role of a clerk in his own former kingdom. The changes rippled outward into the Vances' social life. The foundation of their standing had been their unassailable wealth and power. Now, whispers followed them through the country club and at charity galas. Robert Vance had lost control of his own company. His son-in-law, the quiet, unassuming man they had all dismissed, was now the chairman of the board. The power dynamic had been publicly, humiliatingly inverted. Eleanor's social standing, once rock solid, began to show cracks. Her friends were less deferential, their smiles a little tighter, their questions a little more pointed. The anonymous donations Liam had mandated were a constant, secret drain on their liquid assets, forcing a subtle but noticeable downsizing of their famously extravagant lifestyle. The parties became less frequent, the vacations less exotic. Chloe, in many ways, faced the most difficult reckoning. She was adrift. She had divorced the man who turned out to be the most powerful person in her world. She had returned to a family that was now diminished, humbled, and seething with resentment. Her father and brother blamed her. "You brought this viper into our house," Robert had roared at her one evening, his face purple with rage. "You couldn't see what he was? You were married to him." The irony was crushing. They blamed her for the very blindness they had all shared, the very snobbery they had taught her. She moved back into her childhood bedroom in her parents' mansion, but the house no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt like a prison, its marble halls echoing with accusations and regrets. Her friends, once a source of comfort, now treated her with a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. She was a cautionary tale. 1 month after the boardroom confrontation, Liam received a call. It was Chloe. Her voice was small, hesitant. "Can we meet? I need to talk to you." He agreed, suggesting a neutral location, a quiet coffee shop halfway between his apartment and her parents' home. He arrived first, choosing a small table in the corner. He watched her walk in and was struck by how different she looked. The designer clothes were still there, but they seemed to hang on her differently. The confident, effortless grace was gone, replaced by a kind of weary fragility. She sat down, not meeting his eyes. "Thank you for coming." "Chloe," he said, his tone gentle. She finally looked at him, and he saw that her eyes were red-rimmed. "I wanted to, I don't know, apologize, I guess, though I know it's too late for that." She took a shaky breath. "I was a fool, Liam. We were all fools. We were so busy looking at your price tag that we never bothered to check your value." It was the most honest thing he had ever heard her say. "You were right," she continued, twisting a paper napkin in her hands. "About the leash. I wore it for so long I forgot it was there. I thought it was a necklace. When you tried to take it off, I was scared. I didn't know how to live without it." He listened, saying nothing, letting her speak. This was her moment of catharsis, her confrontation with her own moral mirror. "I see what you're doing at the company," she said. My father, he's a different person. Beaten. Marcus is miserable. My mother just cries. You won. You got your revenge. Liam shook his head slowly. This isn't revenge, Chloe. My father warned me against that. This is balance. Your father's company was a house of cards. It would have collapsed eventually, and it would have taken a lot of innocent people down with it. I'm restructuring it, making it strong, making it honest. Your brother is learning what it means to work for a living. Your mother is learning that a person's worth can't be bought. And your father is learning that respect has to be earned. He paused, his gaze steady. These are painful lessons, but they are necessary ones. This isn't about destroying your family. It's about giving them a chance to build something real for the first time in their lives. She stared at him, a dawning understanding in her eyes. And me? She whispered. What lesson am I supposed to learn? That's for you to decide, he said softly. You have a choice now, Chloe. A real one, for the first time. You're not tied to me, and you're not tied to them in the same way. You can stay in that house and let their bitterness consume you, or you can walk away and build a life of your own. A life that you choose, on your own terms. He stood up, leaving his untouched coffee on the table. I do wish you well, Chloe. I hope you find what you're looking for. He walked out of the coffee shop, leaving her alone with her choice. It was the last time they would ever speak. 6 months passed. The Vance empire was stabilized, leaner and more ethical under Liam's quiet leadership. He had, as his father advised, been the architect. He had redesigned the company, shoring up its foundations and trimming its excesses. Robert Vance remained as CEO, a figurehead who now took his orders from the man he had once tried to patronize. The dynamic was a constant, humiliating reminder of his folly. Liam heard through Alistair Finch that Chloe had moved out of her parents' house. She had taken a small apartment downtown and enrolled in a landscape design course at the local university, a passion she had once mentioned to him, long ago, before her family had dismissed it as an unsuitable hobby. She was working part-time at a flower shop to pay her bills. She had, it seemed, made her choice. She was building something of her own. He felt a quiet sense of hope for her. His own life had found a new rhythm. He sold the apartment he had shared with Chloe and bought the restored brownstone he had always wanted, the one with the garden and the fireplace. He filled it not with expensive art, but with books, comfortable furniture, and the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived. He continued his work as Aurelius, but the secret was no longer a burden. It was simply a part of who he was. His wealth was a tool, one he used to invest in promising, ethical startups and to fund the educational charities his father would have approved of. One crisp autumn evening, he was in his study, sitting in his father's old leather armchair. The fire was crackling in the hearth. He was looking at an old photograph of his father, the two of them on a fishing trip years ago. He felt a profound sense of peace. The anger was gone. The hurt had faded to a dull ache, a scar that served as a reminder. He had not become them. He had not used his power for petty cruelty. He had sought justice, not revenge. He had maintained his integrity. He thought about the Vances and the lesson they were forced to learn, that true worth is not about status, wealth, or appearances. It is about character, integrity, and the quiet strength to be true to oneself, even when the world tells you that you are not enough. Hidden strength, he now knew, was infinitely more powerful than displayed dominance. He had honored his father's legacy. He had been the architect. And in rebuilding their world, he had finally, truly, built his own. The house was warm, the fire was bright, and for the first time in a very long time, Liam Harrison felt completely and utterly at home. The story of Liam and the Vances serves as a powerful reminder for all of us. It shows that patience and integrity can be the most powerful weapons against arrogance, and that a person's true value can never be measured by superficial standards. It's a testament to the idea that respect must be earned through character, not demanded by status. We all face moments where we feel underestimated or dismissed. The question is, how do we respond? Do we let it diminish us? Or do we, like Liam, cultivate our hidden strengths and wait for the right moment to create our own balance? Think about a time you felt underestimated. How did you handle it, and what did you learn from it? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We can all learn from each other's experiences. If this story of vindication and moral clarity resonated with you, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more tales of justice and redemption. Thank you for joining us on this journey, and we look forward to seeing you in the next story.